A few weeks ago, WWE, in its eternal quest to be crowned most publicly beloved super nice company in the world best friend, laid off a raft of both on and off-screen employees in their new WrestleMania week tradition of corporate spring cleaning before posting substantial profits. A PR juggernaut indeed. There have been many wacky, high-profile wrestler firings in the past, often based on incidents that didn't actually happen in the ring. Sid Vicious going on a scissor-wielding rampage in a Blackburn hotel, Mr. Perfect for almost causing a goddamn plane crash on the infamous plane ride from hell, and Highlander Robbie for going to watch some TNA, the worst offense someone could commit. But all this got us thinking, are there 10 wrestlers who got themselves fired because of an actual match itself? Oh boy, yes there are. We actually found 11, but we won't go into detail on the Koji Kitao incident because we already did in our 10 wrestlers who tried to injure their opponents video. Go watch that if you want to know more. Ooh, intrigue. I'm Adam, hailing from PartsFunknown, and here are 10 matches that got wrestlers fired. Number 10, Brian Clark. Well, this seems a bit unfair. So it's 2001 and WWE are slap bang in the middle of the Invasion, which if I remember correctly, everyone really liked. As a favor to Big Evil Big Knievel, WWE brought in former two-time WCW tag champs Chronic, aka the two Bryans, Brian Clark and Brian Adams. Adams being a friend of Undertaker from back when he was Crush. Who better than Crush? Turns out loads of people, because when Chronic fought the Brothers of Destruction in their first pay-per-view match at Unforgiven 2001, the match sucked. A plodding, boring mess with none of the teams even slightly gelling in the ring. The backstage reaction to the match was so strong that Chronic was immediately told they were being demoted to developmental, with Clark reacting so poorly to that, he was let go, which is a little harsh because if you fired everyone who had a bad match in 2001, the WWF would probably just consist of Kurt Angle and a whole bunch of mirrors. Number 9, The Ultimate Warrior. Oh brother. SummerSlam 1991 was partly promoted on a match made in hell. Hulk Hogan and The Ultimate Warrior versus Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel Mustafa and General Adnan, and oh boy was it. Less so for the kayfabe reasons and more for the colossal shitstorm that happened backstage surrounding the main event of the second biggest show of the year. Ultimate Warrior believed that at the time WWF owed him somewhere in the ballpark of $500,000 because of perceived pay disparity between himself and Hogan. If Vince didn't stump up the cash, Warrior threatened to no-show SummerSlam despite half of the advertising centering around his match. Well, nobody puts Vince in a corner, and despite bowing to Warrior's demands, as soon as the world's craziest jogger rushed backstage, running off Adnan and Mustafa with a chair, he was met with a pink slip and told to get the hell out of the company, not even returning for the post-match celebration with Hogan. Number 8, Brad Maddox. For a number of reasons, Brad Maddox is the true rated R superstar. Despite looking like an amalgamation of all three chipmunks, Alvin, Simon and Theodore, turns out Mr. Maddox has quite the potty mouth on him, one that saw him removed from the company in what would turn out to be one of WWE's more hypocritical firings. On the fateful night, November 24, 2015, Maddox wrestled a dark match against R-Truth shortly before a scheduled taping of Main Event in Indianapolis. As anyone who's been to Indianapolis would understand, during the dark segment, Maddox called the crowd cocky pricks. Makes sense. Here's a picture of people from Indianapolis. Look at those cocky pricks. Maddox had not been cleared to use such language, Vince was in attendance, and Maddox got in trouble, being released shortly thereafter. Like, okay, WWE's a family show, but the firings made all the more harsh when a mere 3 months later, on the 22nd of February episode of Raw, Vince told Shane he would get a, quote, beating on actual live television. It's unclear if Vince was fired for that blunder, but reports aren't positive. Number 7, Eugene. Oh, Eugene. Back for more, I see. Look, despite my public very much dislike for the whole Eugene gimmick, it's never a good day when a wrestler is fired, especially when the firing is as openly cruel as this one. Back in 2009, Raw was really bad, so WWE decided to turn that ship around by re-signing Eugene to a contract. That'll do it. Eugene's first and only televised match back was on August 10th in a contract on a pole match against The Miz, who was wearing a mask and calling himself the Calgary Kid for reasons I just can't be bothered to explain. Evidently, Eugene wasn't in the best shape, as the man who played him, Nick Dinsmore, would explain in a later interview. He got backstage after his match with the Calgary Miz and was told, and I'm quoting Dinsmore here, "We're not selling fat old Eugene, you're fired." Harsh that. Fun fact, that was the first night that The Miz said, "I'm The Miz and I'm awesome." It's just a little fun fact, leave me alone. Number 6, Arn Anderson, and now somewhat of a rarity, a match that managed to get someone fired, but weirdly, none of the wrestlers who actually wrestled in it. Arn Anderson, former Four Horsemen super veteran, was working as a producer for WWE in early 2019. It was February 10th at a WWE house show in Saginaw, Michigan, and one of the matches on the card was a 6-woman tag featuring Bayley, Dana Brooke and Natalya going over Mickie James, Nikki Cross and Alicia Fox. On the fateful night in question, Fox reportedly turned up to work intoxicated. As you probably know, wrestling is being dangerous even when everyone is stone cold sober, so this was rightfully seen as an egregious dereliction of duty when Arn Anderson let her go out and compete regardless. Fox was benched for 2 months after the incident, but Anderson himself was fired and would appear in AEW 6 months later. Number 5, Dustin Rhodes and Blacktop Bully. Turns out high-profile departures from major wrestling promotions are something of a Rhodes family tradition. Cody's break with WWE is one of the most significant releases of the generation. Dusty Rhodes was famously fired from newly christened WCW in 1988 after he booked a segment where the Road Warriors opened him up with a spike, breaking a rule laid down by company's new boss Turner Broadcasting to not allow blood. And Dustin Rhodes would prove to be his father's son 7 years later when WCW fired him for the exact same thing. It was uncensored 1995, just a terrible year for American wrestling all over, Jesus Hulkamania Christ. The show opened with a King of the Road match which saw Blacktop Bully aka Demolition Smash aka Repo Man fight Dustin Rhodes in a cage filled with hay on the back of a moving truck, in what would happen if Mad Max Fury Road had been directed by Sergio Leone after he just suffered a major stroke. If the potential for motion sickness and hay fever wasn't bad enough, the very, very boring match also saw both men blading, again breaking WCW's no blood rule, which saw both men immediately fired. Number 4, Jeff Jarrett. Vince McMahon never forgets. Another weird situation that saw a wrestler get fired from WWE a whole 2 years after a match that rustled Vince's jimmies. No Mercy 1999 saw the payoff to a cunning little scheme engineered by Jeff Jarrett and his buddy Vince Russo. Both men were departing WWE and headed for WCW, where they would try to save the ailing brand by shooting it straight through the brain. Jarrett was Intercontinental Champion in mid-99 and was in a feud with China. Russo convinced WWE to blow off the feud at No Mercy, then promptly left the company before the pay-per-view, only for WWE to then discover that Jarrett the champ would be out of contract at the time of the pay-per-view, under no legal obligation to perform. Jarrett told Vince, either pay me $300,000 or I no-show and take the belt to WCW. Like Ultimate Warrior before him, Jeff got paid his ransom money before being gleefully fired on live TV 2 years later after Vince bought WCW. Like Warrior, both men are now in the WWE Hall of Fame because WWE history is just one long reality show of people fighting, crying, making out, fighting, crying, and fighting. Number 3, Buff Bagwell. He may wear a hat better than anyone this side of the Teletubbies, but Buff Bagwell's career in WWE was as accomplished as it was long. It was very short. Like most of the WCW stars who voluntarily waved goodbye to free money to try and start the invasion off right, WWE repaid Buff's kindness with custard pies to the face and genitals. On a now infamous episode of Raw in Tacoma on July 2nd, 2001, WWE attempted to launch WCW as its own separate brand, with its own pyro, its own announce team of Arn Anderson and Scott Hudson, and a main event of Buff Bagwell challenging Booker T for the WCW Championship. Fans immediately shat on the concept of the match, pelting it with boos and chants of "this match sucks." The backstage reaction to the match was so strong that the concept of a separate WCW was immediately cancelled, and Buff was gone from the company within the week, WWE executing his career like Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. Your name is Buff, right? And you are the stuff, right? Kablam! Number 2, Teddy Hart. Teddy Hart is the nephew of Bret Hart, a cat breeder, a talented wrestler, and also one of the most blacklisted men in professional wrestling, with most agreeing that his potential will never be realized after constant legal troubles and managing to burn bridges with promotions including WWE, Impact, Ring of Honor, AAA, MLW, and more over the last 20 years. His issues with Ring of Honor were the most dramatic, with his incredibly public blackballing from the company stemming from a now infamous match in 2003. On November 1st, Ring of Honor held a show called Main Event Spectacles, which saw a scramble cage match featuring, amongst other teams, the Next Generation Hart Foundation, Jack Evans and Teddy Hart. After the planned match was over, Teddy Hart suddenly stopped selling and began doing moonsaults and shooting star presses from the top of the cage before then vomiting in the ring. Doing unplanned high spots is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, both to yourself and the people who, haven't been told you're about to land on them. And the locker room was so outraged that Hart was physically thrown out of the building. And number 1, Mr. Kennedy. Poor Mr. Kennedy, bloody hell. He had a fairly cursed run in WWE, constantly having big plans curtailed by terrible luck. After an initial undefeated streak, he was sidelined for 6 months with an injury. He came back, won Money in the Bank at Mania 23, but lost the briefcase after what appeared to be another injury that was actually much less serious than expected. Too late, Edge has already cashed it in. Later that year, he was scheduled to be part of the huge Mr. McMahon illegitimate son angle, but that changed when he was suspended for violating the wellness policy. After yet another injury the year later, Mr. Kennedy returned to in-ring action in May 2009, wrestling one match, that match would get him fired. A 10-man tag match featuring good boys wearing Lakers jerseys and bad guys wearing Nuggets jerseys. I'm reliably informed it's something to do with basketball. Cool. During the match, Kennedy gave Randy Orton a back suplex, which saw Randy land on his neck and shoulder rather than his back. You can see Randy's angry as soon as he lands. He's not good at containing his temper. Incensed because he had a history of shoulder injuries and was WWE champion at the time, Randy Orton persuaded John Cena to complain with him about Kennedy's recklessness to Vince McMahon, who agreed to have him released and sent packing Kennedy. And that's our list. If you enjoyed this video, please click that like button, share the video around, and make sure you subscribe to PartsFunknown for more silly wrestling content. Jam that jam.